All right, so we're diving into a case today that, well, let's just say it's a real head scratcher. The story of Michael Darnell Harris. Multiple murder convictions, DNA evidence that throws everything we thought we knew into question. I mean, really, where do we even begin with this one?
Yeah, you're not kidding. This one it's got all the elements of a true crime thriller.
Yeah.
We're talking twists, turns, you name it. Buckle up.
So for folks joining us, we're going deep on the Michael Darnell Harris case today. We've poured over court records, news articles, the whole nine yards to really try to understand how this whole thing unfolded.
And that's exactly what makes this case so fascinating, right?
Right.
It's not just about one crime. It's about a series of events, these ripple effects that just keep going. And then the question of justice, right?
Yeah.
Was justice served?
Yeah, and how do you even begin to answer that, right? So, okay, let's set the stage here. Early 1980s Michigan. Michael Darnell Harris. He's not doing so well, struggling financially, kind of bouncing around, living a pretty transient life. Then, December 1982, he gets arrested. This is for a brutal attack, breaking into a 68-year-old woman's home, beating and raping her.
And that right there, that arrest, well, it's like that first domino, right? Because suddenly it's like the police start connecting him to all these unsolved murders and rapes, elderly women across Michigan, Lansing, Ypsilanti, Jackson. It's a lot to take in, to be honest.
Okay, yeah, let's break it down a bit. Let's focus on one specific case for now, okay? The murder of 79-year-old Ula Kurdi. This one's really important because it becomes like central to the whole story down the road.
Yeah.
So the police, they're building their case against Harris. What kind of evidence are we talking about here?
Well, this was way before DNA evidence was, common practice. So they're working with blood type analysis, fingerprints, witness statements, that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And in that assault case, they find cat hairs on Harris's clothing. And guess what? They match the victim's cat. I mean, come on.
I mean, that's got to be pretty damning, right? Pretty hard to explain away.
Right. But then there's more. 19 people identify Harris. 19. Including the woman he assaulted. Talk about pressure.
No kidding. I mean, he even tries to kill himself while he's in jail waiting for his trial.
Yeah, that's a whole other layer to this, isn't it? I mean, what was going through his head? Was he really guilty and just couldn't take it? Or was it, I don't know, something else entirely? We can't know for sure, but it just adds to the mystery of it all.
So with all that stacked against him, Harris is found guilty of assault and rape. He's sentenced to 60 to 90 years. And that's just the beginning, because then he faces two more trials for the murders of Ula Kurdi and another woman, Denise Swanson, convicted in both. Life sentences.
It's important to remember the timing here, though. We're talking the early to mid-'80s, right? Forensic science. It wasn't what it is today. DNA testing. Forget about it. It wasn't even on the radar yet.
So the prosecution, they're building their case on things like eyewitness testimony, physical evidence, like those cat hairs, and trying to establish this pattern of behavior.
Exactly. And for a while, that's enough. But then things change. In the late 90s, DNA technology catches up, and they test some of the evidence, and bam, it links Harris to 3 more murders. Elderly women. 2 more life sentences. At this point, you got to think open and shut case, right? A serial killer finally behind bars.
Seems like it, right? Like, finally, justice is served, except, well, this story, it's not over yet. Not even close. And that's where things take a turn. A big one.
So yeah, you've got Michael Darnell Harris. Multiple life sentences. Seems like a done deal, right? But wait, there's more. 2015 rolls around. And Harris, he's always maintained his innocence, right? He requests new DNA testing on evidence from that Ula Kurdi murder case.
And, oh boy, this is where it gets crazy. The results, no match. The DNA isn't Harris's. I mean, can you imagine this case everyone thought was settled? It just blows up.
Total chaos.
Yeah.
The whole legal system's got to be reeling. I mean, here's a guy convicted as a serial killer, and now it's like, wait, what if it was all wrong? The Michigan State Police, they launched this massive investigation trying to figure out, like, was evidence messed with? Was the original investigation botched? It's a huge mess.
And hold on, there's even more. Remember that chair? The one with Harris's fingerprints on it? Well, apparently it wasn't even kept as evidence. They gave it back to the victim's family.
Yeah, that's not good. When you're talking about evidence, that's a big no-no.
Yeah.
You got to maintain that chain of custody, who had it, when, all that. Otherwise, how can you be sure nobody tampered with it?
Okay, so we've got new DNA results. We got potentially mishandled evidence. This all leads to an evidentiary hearing set for September 2016. For those of us who aren't lawyers, can you explain what that even means? Why was this hearing such a big deal?
Sure. So basically, think of it as a mini-trial. Inside the main trial, it gives the defense a chance to bring new stuff to the table, new evidence, challenge the old evidence. And in this case, Harris's lawyers, they're hoping to use all this new information, the DNA, the chair, everything, to convince a judge that the first trial, it was a bad one, and that Harris deserves another shot.
So it's looking like maybe, just maybe, Harris is going to get a new trial. And then, bam, early 2017, another plot twist, another DNA test. And this time, they find Harris's DNA at the crime scene. So what the heck happened?
Yeah, we're getting into the weeds of forensic science, right? Was there a mistake with the first test? Did the technology just get better, making the second test more accurate? Or, like Harris and his attorneys are saying, was there something fishy going on? Did someone plant evidence?
Yeah. Harris is claiming that the cops, or maybe even the prosecutors, they messed with the evidence on purpose to frame him. He even asked to question the lab technicians, the ones who actually handled the evidence. But the court, they say no. So now you've got these two DNA tests, totally different results. You've got accusations of misconduct and a ton of questions with no answers.
And just like that, poof, the evidentiary hearing is gone. No new trial for Harris. But even though the case is basically stalled in the courts, the questions, they don't just disappear. Was Michael Darnell Harris wrongly convicted?
Oh.
Or is he a guilty man who somehow managed to game the system?
And this is real life. This isn't just some legal puzzle. This is a man who spent decades in prison. It's about the families of the victims, people who deserve to know what really happened. And honestly, it's about whether we can trust the justice system at all. I mean, if Harris is innocent, how did this happen? And if he's guilty, then how do we make sense of all this conflicting evidence? It just doesn't add up.
It's a tough one. And I think it's time to zoom out a bit, because this whole thing, it raises some bigger questions about the justice system as a whole, about forensic science, and about what it really means to fight for justice.
Okay, yeah, let's talk about that. As we wrap up our deep dive here, what are the bigger lessons we can learn from this whole messy, confusing case? It's easy to get lost in the details, the evidence, the trials, the back and forth. But I keep thinking about the people at the heart of it all. Michael Darnell Harris, locked up all these years, still saying he didn't do it. And then the families of the women who were killed left wondering, what really happened? Their lives were shattered.
It's true. And this case, it kind of forces us to face something we don't always like to think about. The justice system, it's not perfect. We want to believe it gets it right every time, but it's run by people. People make mistakes.
And we've seen those mistakes. Other cases where DNA proves someone innocent after years in prison. It makes you wonder, how many more are there? How many people are locked up for crimes they didn't commit? And then the flip side, how do we make sure the real criminals, the guilty ones, are actually held accountable? Especially when the evidence is, well, it's all over the place.
Yeah, it's a tough balance, right? You've got the idea that everyone's innocent until proven guilty. But you also have to get justice for the victims. So what happens when you're not even sure what the truth is?
It's a question with, I think, a lot of weight. And honestly, I think this case shows us how important it is to keep asking those questions, to keep digging, to keep pushing for the truth. We can't just accept a verdict because that's what the court decided, especially when there are still doubts, We have to demand more transparency, accountability, a real commitment to finding out what really happened.
And it's not just about the courts and lawyers and all that. It's about all of us. We have to, I think, be more aware, educate ourselves, have these tough conversations and make sure our leaders are doing what they're supposed to be doing, making sure everyone gets a fair shake.
This deep dive, this whole thing has been quite a ride, hasn't it? We started with what seemed like clear convictions, then boom, DNA throws a wrench in everything. Conflicting evidence, accusations of people doing shady stuff, and in the end, a lot of unanswered questions. But if there's one thing I'm taking away from all this, it's that justice, well, it's not a finish line. It's a journey, something we have to keep working towards, keep fighting for.
I agree with that. The Michael Darnell Harris case, it might not ever have a clear ending. But the things it makes us think about, the challenges it brings up for our justice system, for our values, well, those are things we have to deal with, learn from, and hopefully use them to make things better.
So as we move on from this case, let's keep those questions in mind. Let's talk about them, let's challenge what we think we know, and let's demand better from our system. Because ultimately, the pursuit of truth and justice, well, that's on all of us. We can't just sit back and ignore it. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive